In NuME Recovery and Wellness Centers, we focus on three core areas of your wellness: weight management, longevity, and performance. These areas are all influenced by key factors such as nutrition and supplementation, sleep, fitness activity, and stress management. To support your journey towards better health, we've partnered with some of the leading companies in these fields, providing you cutting edge tools designed to help you take control of your wellness. Today, we're excited to introduce Dr. Dan Cohen from SoulTech Health. In our conversation, we'll explore our partnership, Dr. Cohen's journey in the fields of stress, sleep, and brain function, and the story behind SoulTech Health. We'll also take a deep dive into the science of sleep and how SoulTech's innovative technology can empower you to manage and improve your sleep for a better overall well-being. Dr. Cohen, welcome. If you could take a moment and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about SoulTech Health.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. It's nice to be here. In essence, I'm a neurologist, and I developed early in my career an interest in sleep. And so I decided back then with my partner to start a company rather than just practice sleep medicine. And we started a company that ultimately automated sleep diagnostics. So we looked at sleep labs, back in the mid 80s, and every night they would generate half a mile of paper. And so we said, we can computerize this, and we did. So we wrote all the algorithms and created automated sleep diagnostics, which was much more granular and refined than the way they had been doing it. And that company ended up being very successful. That company actually became known for the Breathe Right nasal strip, which we introduced to help prevent snoring and to sleep better. And then we started another company, and this other company was SoulTech Health, what we have now. And this really was inspired by the fact that 75 to 90% of all medical conditions are either caused by or made worse by chronic stress. And so we wanted to see if we could solve that problem because up until this point, nobody has been able to do it safely, non-invasively, drug-free, and where it's easy to use. And so we basically developed that technology after literally 15 years of research to try to figure it out. And uh, what we found in the process is when you can cure chronic stress, you're dealing with the same part of the brain that deals with the pacemakers of sleep. And so we ended up with a technology that could do both.
That's incredible. And we've seen that in our field too, as we do, individual consulting, especially with, business professionals, CEOs, individuals that are highly driven that have to function at a very, very high cognitive level. When we start looking at their stress and how that correlates directly back to sleep, and as we start to regulate some of their sleep patterns through behavioral change, through patterning, through supplementation, and different things like that, we see an overall decrease in the system as a whole. We see the stress levels come down, we see cognitive function go up, and it's really kind of been an incredible journey. But it's always been something that's pretty hard to manage because it's a lifestyle thing, and a lot of the different technologies or modalities like meditation and things like that, it requires a high level of practice and a lot of regular practice in order to get any positive effect from that. And one of the things we've seen with the implementation of the SoulTech and the ZGen system is we're getting immediate response within just a few short days of use. Once the system calibrates and kind of goes through its processes and starts working on regulating people's sleep, the change has been incredible. And we have documented processes as we've monitored the changes, and we've incorporated the technology to see the changes in the sleep patterns and how fast those results are happening are really incredible. How do you feel that transition from really targeting and looking at stress management and how it transitioned over into the sleep space and kind of how those two merged together?
Okay. Well, before I answer your question, let me step back to something that you said about how quickly it worked, because I want to make sure we set expectations properly, because we deal with an array of customers that may be broader than what you're dealing with. You're dealing with, probably a younger set of people that are already functioning at a high level. Okay, and you're right. In those people, it can improve their condition very quickly. because they already have all the brain circuits still present. And what we've learned in this process is it doesn't work nearly as fast if you're dealing with a 70-year-old with other issues. So for instance, I mean, and this is, we've kind of worked this out to a formula,
Hmm.
just so that your listeners can understand this. For every 10 years beyond 30 years of age, we say add 3 weeks to how long it's going to take, for this thing to make a meaningful difference. And,
Yeah.
I'm serious. So we
Oh,
start out with a
absolutely.
baseline of 2 to 4 weeks. And then imagine if you're 60, then, add 9 more weeks. And
Right.
then if you add any considerable, emotional or physical trauma, add another month. And if your exercise level is none to low, add another month.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
and I think that has a lot to do with just based on conversations that we've had and studies that we've done. That really has to do with a lot of the neuroplasticity because we're really rewiring and rebuilding some of the circuitry in the brain to be able to do that. Because it just is a natural process of aging. We're losing, our ability to have structured deep sleep, especially as we start getting over into our 40s. We really start losing that ability for our brains to be able to regulate, deep sleep.
Well, oh, you're absolutely correct. I mean, if you think about it, Stanford did a study years ago that was, I'm really thankful they did it because it explains this point so well. They mapped the stage of sleep and the length of those stages from people or children that were 5 to older people that were 85. And they showed the composites. And the 5-year-olds were sleeping 9 hours a night, and the 85-year-olds were sleeping essentially 5 hours and 20 minutes. So you lost 3 hours and 40 minutes from childhood to, old age. All right. But when they looked at the components, most of the loss was in the most important stage of sleep, deep sleep. And that's the stage of sleep that's restorative for health and so many other things. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of benefits you get from slow wave sleep. And that's something that happens with age, plain and simple. It's a built-in clock. Now, what we've been lucky to be able to do is we can restore that. But this is not a sleeping pill. And also, no, sleeping pills don't restore that. Sleeping pills don't give you normal sleep. They're
Right.
sedatives,
Yep.
okay? They knock you out. We provide normal sleep, but again, over time, unless you're young and healthy and you have a reasonable level of brain function. Back to what you said, in essence, if the circuits are there, we can support the circuitry. If the circuits are not there, you have to rebuild them. And that's the process. That's key.
Yeah, and that's what we found too is even with, behavioral patterns and supplementation, we're inducing different levels of sleep, but it's really just kind of a band-aid over the problem. There's not actual any rewiring of the systems that are occurring. So, supplements have their place and we are able to effectively utilize them to try to boost other processes like we support magnesium to try to support the melatonin balance. And there's different things that we do to try to support the mechanisms. But at the end of the day, if the wiring, like you mentioned, is not there, then we have a problem. So how do the frequencies affect the different stages of sleep and the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system? Like how are the two kind of correlated together? Because it really, when you started looking at that, it was from a stress management perspective. But then as the studies went further and further and the research went further, there seemed to be a direct correlation on how those same frequencies are incorporated into the sleep.
Yeah. Well, in essence, you brought up the autonomic nervous system, and this is a primitive part of the brain, and it evolved, about 500 million years ago. Started in fish, and it's all about our survival instinct. And so the first part of the autonomic nervous system to develop is called the sympathetic division for fight or flight. Okay. So
Mhm.
it's literally for survival. And then as a counterbalance, when we developed more organs, we needed the parasympathetic division, which is known for rest and digest. And that produces relaxation. Think of it as a seesaw. When one is up, the other is down. And typically during stress, you have the sympathetic up and the parasympathetic is down. And what you really want to do is increase the parasympathetic, unless you need to be in fight or flight mode.
Right.
Okay, so there is a reason to have that mode, but it's rare. Okay, you really want to live in a parasympathetic mode of rest and digest where you don't have chronic stress. And so it really took us a lot of work to figure out what do we have to do to enhance parasympathetic function. And one of the things I learned in neurology is that the language of the nervous system is frequency based. As the nervous system evolved, lower parts operate at very low frequencies. As the brain evolved and you added these different layers, because they had to control the lower levels, they had to function at higher frequencies for that control function to take a place. And so in essence, when you look at the parasympathetic division, there was enough work done where we knew where to start. Now,
Mhm.
within that range of the parasympathetic, we had to figure out, well, what's going to produce the best reduction in stress? And so that took a fair amount of experimentation. And then we also learned in the process that not everybody's frequency is the same. And so that's why we had to customize it and in sleep do the calibration process, which continues, it's ongoing. And so for stress, we kind of figured that out. And as we figured that out, we realized, hey, you know what? The same frequencies for that individual that create the best stress reduction are the same frequencies that produce deep sleep.
Mhm.
Okay, and that was a big breakthrough for us because then we knew, okay, we can use that for deep sleep. Yeah, the example you have up there is all fragmented and there's almost no deep sleep. So this is an older individual with essentially lousy sleep. All right, they're not going to feel good in the morning. All right, so we learned that if we provided these frequencies over time, that part of the nervous system would say, hey, you know what? They're supporting this level of frequency. And think of the nervous system as there's two broad categories of cells. There's nerve cells themselves, and then there's what's called the glial system. The nerve cells are like digital. They either fire or they don't. But the other cells sort of regulate what fires. And so we were stimulating the other cells, not the nerve cells, because the nerve cells weren't there. But when they were moving at the frequencies that we were operating at, that caused the nerve cells to regenerate. All right. And that's what took the time for, let's say, an older individual who's lost almost all of those cells.
Mhm.
If you're 30 years old, guess what? You still lost some of them. Even by your mid to late 40s, you've lost 60 to 70% of them. So this rejuvenation has to occur over time. And so, again, frequencies, basis of the nervous system. We know what parts of the nervous system we need to essentially support or enhance. So we provide that. Our system also includes a wrist wearable that detects the different sleep stages in real time or where it wants to go. And then the wearable, it's a closed loop system, tells the generator with a fraction of a second of Bluetooth technology, it just sends a transmission, and then the generator then essentially produces the required frequencies for that stage of sleep for that individual. So it's
Mhm.
all customized.
Yeah, and we're so incredibly excited and fortunate to have this partnership and this relationship, because in our space with trying to help people manage their stress and manage their sleep, it's been a challenge between trying to diagnose, because most of the wearables on the market, and this has been the biggest problem when we were looking at technology partners to align with. One of the biggest challenges we had was in the sleep space. So most of the wearables, if not all the wearables on the market, with the exception of SoulTech, all they're doing is they're providing data, they're providing insight. There's no actual therapy that goes along with them. And so then we're having to build a therapeutic plan to try to identify what we're seeing from the sleep data, and then what corrective action we can try to take to try to support somebody in healthy sleep. And it's really been a challenge to try to build, because everybody is different. Every sleep cycle that we see is different. There's so many different influencers on that, with trauma, PTSD. I mean, there's just, the list goes on how people's sleep cycles are really affected. Um, and so being able to now have a tool to be able to provide to people that actually gives them a therapeutic benefit is incredible. And we're as you are, we're big into frequency. We have a whole practice built around our vibroacoustic therapy, which I know is something that you're familiar with. And it's great technology, but the challenge is always the use case. And a lot of the modalities, like I mentioned before, they require so much consistent utilization that it's really hard for people to incorporate that into their daily lifestyle. Like with our vibroacoustic therapy, it's fantastic technology. It's very therapeutic. It's great for stress management, but you have to use it on a regular basis. And so for people to allocate that time on a regular basis is very, very difficult. And so when we took a look at SoulTech, and we saw the ability to be able to leverage the technology, which again, you still have to use consistently. But one of the things that we do consistently on a daily basis is sleep. So if we can incorporate those therapies during a time where they're sleeping, right? They're getting essentially, 6 to 8 hours or whatever their sleep cycle is, they're getting a therapeutic session over the course of that time on a regular basis.
Well, and Jason, that's the point we learned too, because when we started this company, we started with vibroacoustics.
Hmm.
And we made a technology, we made a product for that, and we gave it to 50 holistic practitioners in the Twin Cities. And then we watched, number one, we had already proven that it was extremely effective. And
Hmm.
we only required the user to use it 3 hours a week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for an hour.
Sure.
And what we found when we gave it to the practitioners, people couldn't comply with that because it took too much time. And particularly stressed people,
Hmm.
they don't have the time. That's why they're, in part chronically stressed, you know.
Exactly.
And so literally our challenge was, my God, we literally have to make a technology that does multitasking meditation. I
Mhm.
mean, how's that for an oxymoron?
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
and so you're right. You can do this while you sleep, number one.
Mhm.
But that doesn't necessarily solve all the problem depending upon the level of stress.
Right.
Okay. And so, one of the things we realized was daytime functioning of this technology is also, it's a great supplement to the nighttime work. Because you're right when you said if you sleep better at night, you're going to have less stress. But if you have less stress, you're definitely going to sleep better at night. And I would say that situation, that paradigm is even more important than good sleep producing less stress. It's
Mhm.
really less stress produces better sleep
Yeah.
in terms of the cognitive changes. And so, you know, what we learned in the process of doing this is make something that all you have to do is press a button, to operate. And we have people that, believe it or not, have two units. They have one to sleep with, and they don't want to move it out from under their bed. So they have
Mhm.
another that they put under their desk, by their feet, and they
Yeah.
run that during the day, particularly for some of the other functions that we're not going to talk about it today because we really shouldn't. But
Hmm.
there are medical applications here that they're better served by using it during the day.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can be working at your computer and operating the technology. You don't have to pay attention to the technology.
Mhm. And that's the kind of the benefit to it. And that was actually the next part that I was going to touch on because we have spent a little bit of time talking about how it's incorporated in sleep, but there's also a secondary function on the device to allow for stress management throughout the course of the day as well. And so there's a feature where you can turn it on, like you had mentioned, where you're sitting at your desk and you can incorporate those therapies and those sessions during the course of the day. And it's totally non invasive. You can continue to work, be productive, have a unit under your desk. We have the units in our facility as people come in and are doing different modalities. We have the ability to have a unit with a chair and they sit back and relax and they go through, a 30-minute session where they're just kind of getting some of that therapeutic benefit from the device. And so we've found in both applications, not only in the sleep application, but also the daily stress reduction application, because stress is such a draining part of the system. It has so many different effects across everything that we do. It has effects on, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we focus on weight management, we focus on longevity, and we focus on performance. And stress there's a direct correlation to the level of stress across all three of those different pieces. And so if you're a highly stressed individual, you have elevated cortisol levels, different things like that, it has a tremendous impact on your weight and your weight management, right? And same thing with longevity, and same thing with your performance.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what I would recommend when you use it for stress, and this is something that people have to learn over time, but
Hmm.
we found it to be exceedingly effective, and that is stress is born from not thinking right.
Hmm.
Okay, we all of us to some extent as human beings have been insulted or criticized or abused as children
Hmm.
to some extent.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Some much worse than others. And the ego develops a belief that we're not good enough. Okay. And that's why we were treated this way. It's an ingrained belief in every one of us.
Hmm.
Okay. And you have to sort of live with that. And people develop defense mechanisms, coping strategies to deal with it. And I don't want to get too deeply into this, but one of the things that's important in terms of reversing this situation is to kind of move out of the head, okay? And spend a little less time thinking and a little more time feeling,
Hmm.
okay? Getting in tune with one's feeling nature, which has phenomenal benefits. And I'm not just talking about unwinding defense mechanisms, etc. I'm
Hmm.
talking about intuitive abilities, knowing versus thinking. I mean, I'm telling you this as a neurologist, okay? Use this to think about your questions, create your questions, and
Right.
then move into your feeling nature and let the answers come. Because there's another part of you, I'll just say your higher self for differentiation versus ego, that will then give you the answers. So the
Hmm.
knowing is there. And one of the things that I think is kind of magical about this technology, and I think this is probably the most important aspect of it, is the ability to learn how to feel and to know what that feeling sense is like and live in that state where you can immediately move into that higher feeling nature. Okay. And for some people, this is really hard to do. And for others, it comes naturally. So it depends where you are on the spectrum in terms of how easy it is. But, what I tell people all the time is, you know, use this thing for relaxation slash meditation and first focus on your feet. I mean, you don't have to do this like all the time. You don't have to spend your 30-minute or 60-minute session just say, how do my feet feel? How do my feet feel? Just periodically go back to it. And what you want to look for is this subtle vibration, this subtle feeling of like tingling. And when you start to feel that, allow that to come up your legs. And usually by the time it hits your knees, you start feeling it in your hands. And some of your audience right now, if they hold their hands up right now and they focus on the palmar aspect, some of them with a stronger feeling nature will be able to feel that subtle vibration. But in time, you want to feel that throughout your entire body. And so all of your nervous system is active then, but it's in a feeling state rather than a thinking state. And we humans are very, very good at being able to reproduce feeling states immediately once we know what they feel like. And
Hmm.
so then you can move into that state all the time. It's obviously when you're using the technology, it's much more powerful. And you want to be able to deepen that consistently more and more and more so that you can really live in that state. But that's a game changer in my opinion. And I've always my whole business career of 40 plus years, I've ended up being the CEO. And in that process, you have to make a lot of decisions. And I've learned over the years a decision I make from my gut is always better than one that I make from my brain.
Absolutely. And that's why we're so big on a lot of the different frequency based therapies, because we're surrounded by frequency all around us, where there's vibrational frequency from person to person, different energies, different things that you're exposed to on a daily basis. And being able to really dial into those is so critically important. That's why we really moved away from meditation, and we moved more, our practice moved more originally into more of embodiment practices, and trying to get us kind of out of the mind a little bit and get us more into the body and get us more into that feeling of the body. Because when you do meditation, it's the mind governing the mind, and that can be a little tricky and takes a lot of practice to be able to effectively do that. But when you transition that to the body, it's a whole different experience. And I try to compare it when I talk to individuals about what embodiment practices are and things like that. I compare it to like a runner's high, right? Where, or you do an athletic event, you maybe go skiing or something like that, and that feeling when you get done of having that physical impact on your body, your mind kind of just goes into its own space, and the physical body kind of takes over, and so you have that feeling of just a very high level of performance. And being able to have a technology available to help kind of stimulate that is incredible.
Right. Well, you probably watched the movie Top Gun Maverick.
Hmm.
Okay. I mean, I thought that was a great movie. And one of the sub themes was, you know, don't think, just do.
Hmm.
Okay. And that's the point that we're making right now is you don't need to think in order to function at a very high level.
Yep.
You know, I mean, think about a race car driver. I can guarantee you they're not thinking.
No, it's everything is that fast. I mean,
Right.
it's all just pure instinct, and in the ability to wire that into your brain as we coach individuals on that. I mean, we do a lot of different things. Like we're very big on routines, and we recommend people do some morning affirmations and some different things like that. And we're really big on Mel Robbins. She has a book out that's the High Five Habit, and there's something with the connection with the brain with high fiving that stimulates that, and there's a lot of science behind that. And so it's taking those systems and rewiring those systems to give you the ability to just act and function, because your brain knows what to do as long as we kind of get out of its own way sometimes.
Right. Well, and there's other benefits because the area of the brain that we're talking about is really pretty mysterious. It's called the limbic system, and it's a very complicated system that it crosses the boundaries between all the feeling aspects, whether it's the sensory aspects or the sensations from the body, at a deep level, they're like the autonomic feelings of
Mhm.
related to your organs, to your emotional feelings, to your sense of knowing. All of that happens, and it's right in the center of the brain on both sides. And yeah, that's the perfect picture. All the colored areas. That's the limbic system. And the beauty of that is if you live in that state, it not only changes, we've been talking more cognitively in
Mhm.
terms of just knowing how to react, but emotionally it changes. Okay. So you start feeling your emotions much more clearly and identifying them and seeing how you get triggered. But what this does for your relationships is phenomenal, and your compassion, and you're dealing with other people. I mean, this is why this aspect of the technology, in my opinion, this is the most important.
Yeah. And that's really why it was so important to have you on to do an interview with us, because being able to try to articulate this to our client base and to really give them an understanding of how the technology is utilized, not only for therapeutic purposes, but some of the different areas that it impacts in your overall life, and how that can change, all of those different facets from, especially in longevity. If you start reducing stress and you start having healthy practices in that, and you start, having really solid sleep and everything else, your longevity just will go off the charts,
Yeah,
as
even if your longevity doesn't go off the charts, because I always talk to people, and I say, would you like to live to 100? And they go, yeah. I said, well, would you like to live to 100 if you got to 90 and you started to have illnesses? And they go, I don't know. Would you like to live to 90 and have no illness versus live to 100 for the last 10 years? You've got illnesses. And they
And
go,
that
well, I'll take the 90.
and that's the mindset that we really try to get people to sleep when we or to think about is when we talk about longevity, it's not so much, length of time as it is quality, right?
Yeah,
And that's what we're trying to do from a performance perspective is we're trying to help people give people access to tools and modalities that is going to give them a significantly higher quality of life
exactly.
for
And I think
the
that's the
short time
key,
that we're here.
right? Because we don't know. I mean, medically, we don't know yet what is the biomarker really, for longevity. We used to think it was that the end point of the DNA and this and that, and that can be altered. Some people point to delta sleep falling off, because, again, when that drops off, diseases come, you
Mhm.
know. And so, we don't really know exactly what the right biomarker is for that. So we don't know if we can affect longevity, but you're right. I think quality of life probably does enhance longevity in the sense that you are you can function more throughout the day. You can do more. And that level of engagement, I think that desire to live helps.
Mhm. Yeah, and do you feel that that the medical space is kind of shifting from your traditional medical practices and things like that? Do you think people are searching more for different types of technologies like this that are maybe not as very much studied as traditional medicine, and we're seeing some of the benefits, as we start incorporating some of these more holistic type modalities and technologies?
I think there's definitely a shift. There is, however, some significant resistance,
Hmm.
and that resistance comes mainly from, the pharmaceutical industry, and so they push an agenda of life is chemistry. Okay. And there's a huge shift between Western medicine and Eastern medicine. As I'm sure you know, Eastern medicine has this more bias towards energy.
Hmm.
What is the human energy system? How does it impact the body? And so there's all these practices related to, manipulating this energy, which then has an effect on the body. And interestingly enough, in the US, NIH, formed a division and that was more related to Eastern medicine, and they coined the phrase biofield, which was the equivalent of Eastern, energetics.
Hmm.
But there's never been an adoption, in the medical field, even though that happened in 1993, in all these years, that's 31 years ago, there still hasn't been much of an uptake. There has been some, so it's been moving in that direction. And interestingly enough, I mean, we're a young company, and so we're always raising money. And so I've been talking to all these different fund managers and investment bankers and venture capitalists. And it's really interesting to see how so many of them are now interested in these technologies that work on preventive, processes as opposed to curative or disease, you know, uh, products that work on improving illnesses. So they rather would prevent the illness in the first place. And so we're getting a lot of uptick there in terms of interest. And therefore, I think you're going to see a lot more development in that area.
Yeah, and we're seeing the same thing in the wellness space as well. Is the more preventative we can be, we have ran into some resistance when we try to incorporate preventative things. You see it in some of the spaces with the utilization of peptides. You see it in the different space of the utilization of some of the weight loss management drugs and everything that's going on in that space. And it's like there's this resistance to preventative care that's been very interesting to try to navigate. And
Yes,
so
yes.
that's why we do what we do, and we are partnering with technologies like SoulTech to try to, because we're in agreement with you. I've heard you present the message before that this is a technology that everybody should have access to, and so we're on board with that, and we're going to continue to try to support and push that and give people exposure and education towards some of these technologies to give them access to better wellness.
Yeah. Well, and to further illustrate this point from a financial standpoint, what's interesting is the United States spends about 17 to 18% of the GDP on healthcare. And around the world, I mean, Europe's a good example, they spend 10%.
Mhm.
Why?
Well, and it's funny because the bulk of that spend, exactly like you had mentioned before, a bulk of that spend is towards care of a condition that's ongoing. I'd be very curious to see what the number of what is spent on preventative care.
Well, right. I mean, there was an interesting study that was done that was looking at obesity and diabetes. Okay. And one of they wanted to understand, well, okay, what is the trigger for this? You know, and they found that 5 years after fast food moves into a country, obesity and diabetes increase significantly.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we see it all the time. I mean, we've been very fortunate in our practice as we coach people on how to get to a better state of wellness. A lot of them come off of a lot of the medications, whether it's, high blood pressure medication. We've had patients that have completely gone off of their insulin pump as we've balanced them nutritionally and really have gotten them right on the right path, balanced out their sleep and everything else. And we see as we start doing a lot of this preventative care, this dependence on insulin and different medications and things like that goes significantly way down. And I even see it in my own household with sleep. My wife had a issue with her own personal sleep after postpartum depression that she just really had. And she's a mental health therapist by trade. She has her own practice, and she really struggles with sleep to where she has to use supplementation and pharmaceuticals for giving her the appropriate sleep that she needs. And so as we started incorporating this technology, she's one of the case studies that I worked on to try to rewire that system a little bit, rebuild her sleep cycles, and then slowly start to wean her off of the pharmaceutical medication. And it's been incredible to watch that whole entire process unfold.
Yeah, yeah, and we've seen that, and it's pretty rewarding to us because number one, sleeping pills don't produce normal sleep, so that's not going to increase delta sleep,
Mhm.
and that was our main goal when we looked at sleep overall. We had three goals. Help people fall asleep faster, keep them asleep, but most importantly was increase the quality of sleep, which meant two things. And again, most people focus on delta sleep, which is deep sleep,
Mhm.
but you spend half of your sleep time in what's called light sleep. So think of that. 50% of your night is spent in light sleep. And light sleep is everything from drowsiness till almost deep sleep. Yeah. So, okay. And so, wait a minute. I've got 50% of the night spent there. Wouldn't it be nice if I could shift that from drowsiness to almost delta sleep, almost deep sleep? Okay. And so we look at both and say, let's make sure light sleep deepens and then even deep sleep deepens. Because it used to be that in sleep recordings and analysis, there used to be two parts of delta sleep, D3, D4, D4 meaning really deep sleep. And so
Mhm.
we look at all that and we create a composite. So all the non-REM sleep, which is light and deep sleep, we look at non-REM quality. Okay. How deep is all of that, which is 75% of your night, or at least should be.
Mhm.
Okay. And that is the metric that we see change the fastest as we deepen, because right away you may not see a change in delta sleep, but what you're not realizing is your light sleep is becoming deeper.
Yeah. And that was the thing. Like when we started the sleep study on my wife, for example, she couldn't understand the fact that she was on medication and by the clock she was getting 8 hours of sleep, but she couldn't understand why she still felt so incredibly fatigued every day until I convinced her to start tracking the sleep. This was prior to our engagement with SoulTech. And so I put her on a wearable and we started monitoring her sleep. And when we started seeing the sleep patterns and I started sharing that data with her, she was blown away. She's like, well, how do we fix this? And that's where I said, well, we have a partnership now that we're going to evaluate, and we're going to see how we can put all the pieces and parts together, and we'll see how this influences your sleep. And since that study's been on, we're getting close to 60 days now. It's been incredible, and the quality of sleep and just the energy level, the cognitive function, just all of it has had such a huge impact. So we're very excited to bring this to our client base. We're very excited to help spread the message. This has been a partnership that we're very excited about. So, Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and joining us, and helping be able to educate people and really talk about stress and sleep and how the impact of that is on our general health.
No, it was very nice to speak with you. Thank you.